There are a few alternative ways to write for loops, and I want to cover those in this lesson. Let's start off with just the standard loop, and then we'll look at those alternatives here in just a moment. Let's begin by writing a program that calculates simple interest again. So we're going to start out with a balance variable. We'll set it equal to 5,000. Another variable for the rate we'll set to 2%. Then we'll write our for loop for int I equal 1. I less than or equal to 10 plus I, then open the body, then balance is times equal the rate. Close the loop and write out the result and the balance. Let's compile and run it, see what we get. Java C chap 9 part 6.java, and then run it, chap 9 part 6. And so the balance is 6,094 with some odd cents. The first thing we can do different with the for loop is put the loop control variable's initialization statement outside of the loop. And I equals 1. Notice that if I do take out the initialization statement, I still have to put the semicolon there because the compiler is looking for that. This is called a null statement, but the compiler is looking for some type of statement there. Now, by putting the loop control variable outside of the loop, or at least its initialization and declaration outside of the loop, I've changed its scope so that I can reuse the variable after the loop is over. I haven't mentioned this before, but the loop control variable in a for loop can only be used inside the loop if you declare it inside the loop. That's an example of what we call the scope of a variable, and we'll be talking about that more later in the course. But we increase the scope of a variable, or of the loop control variable, if we move it outside the for loop, or at least the declaration and initialization of the loop. But other than that, nothing changes, so let's compile the program and run it again. Verify that nothing changed, and you see we still get the same answer. The other thing we can do is move the modification statement outside of the loop also, plus I. Nothing really changes here. Notice I don't have to put a semicolon up in the heading because I didn't have a semicolon there before, but I do have to put it at the end of the plus I because it's a statement inside the body now, and it has to have a semicolon at the end of it. But other than that, there's no change in how the program works. The semantics of the program, we've just changed the syntax a little bit. Let's compile it again, and then let's run it. Now, having shown you these two alternatives, there's really no reason for you to ever use them. Having shown you these two alternatives, there's almost no reason to ever use them. You might occasionally want to put the declaration and initialization of the loop control variable outside of the loop itself if you want to use that variable's value later on in the program. However, that will rarely, if ever, be the case. There's really no reason to move the modification statement. And the bad thing about modifying the for loop like this is you make your program harder to read because anybody looking at your loop is going to expect these statements to be in their normal place. And if they're not there, that throws the reader off a little bit in trying to understand exactly what your program does. And one of the things you don't want to do is intentionally make your program hard to read. That wraps up my discussion of for loops before the exercises. We'll do an exercise where we work with for loops later. For my next lesson, I want to talk about ways to end loops early or change the flow of a loop by using two statements called break and continue.